Far away from the warm light of the familiar stars, there was a quiet corner of the galaxy where almost no one ever looked. In that forgotten part of space floated a small blue-green planet called Illyra. It was once a place of beauty, with silver oceans that shimmered under twin suns, and forests that glowed softly at night. The people of this world, the Illyrians, lived in harmony with their land. They were tall, graceful beings with translucent skin that caught the light like glass, and their cities shone like crystal gardens. For thousands of years they believed the universe was kind, and that peace was their destiny. But peace can be fragile, especially in a universe where power means survival. One terrible season the sky began to tear. Their sun, once gentle and golden, grew angry and unstable. It spat fire and storms across the heavens, frying satellites, boiling seas, and turning the planet's once clear sky into a curtain of ash. The Illyrians looked up and saw their fate burning above them. Yet it was not only nature that doomed them. Far beyond their system, something else had noticed their weakness. The Cathal Dominion, a brutal empire of warlike creatures, had been watching. The Cathal were feared across hundreds of worlds. They conquered not for survival but for pleasure, consuming everything they touched. Their ships were vast, their soldiers relentless. When they saw the struggling planet, they saw opportunity. Illyra was rich in minerals and life, its people soft and unarmed. To the Cathal, it was a feast waiting to be devoured. The Illyrians tried to send messages for help. They knew of other civilizations out there, voices that had once whispered across the stars. They had listened to the cosmic chatter, the trade beacons, the scientific exchanges between distant species. Somewhere among those signals were humans, the strange newcomers whose homeworld was known as Earth, or as the more intimidating name given by aliens, the Deathworld. The Illyrians had heard that humans came from a planet so harsh that even their smallest creatures could kill. They had heard that humans were bold, emotional, unpredictable. Perhaps such beings might help. So they built a machine deep beneath the Crystal Mountains, a transmitter powered by the heart of their dying world. Engineers, scientists, and dreamers worked day and night, ignoring the tremors that shook the ground or the red storms that rolled across the horizon. Families waited near the ports, clutching their children, whispering that help would come. The message they sent was simple and full of hope. To anyone who can hear this, please help us. We are under attack. We are dying. The signal burst from their planet like a cry in the dark. It traveled through the vacuum of space, bouncing past dead satellites, wandering among the stars. It crossed the vast emptiness for years, decades, even centuries. But the universe is wide, and soundless space has no mercy. The signal weakened with every passing year until it was little more than a whisper of static. No one heard it. On Illyra, the silence was unbearable. Their pleas went unanswered. The Cathal ships arrived soon after, black as night with engines that screamed through the atmosphere. They came not as conquerors with words, but as predators with claws. Cities burned. Forests turned to glass. Oceans evaporated into steam. The Illyrians fought with everything they had. Small defense drones, ancient weapons, their own courage, but it was useless. They were scholars and artists, not soldiers. As their world fell apart, they still believed someone might come. In their final days, the surviving Illyrians gathered in the ruins of their capital city. The great crystal tower that had once touched the clouds was cracked and blackened, but its base still glowed faintly with power. Inside, the last of their engineers strengthened the SOS signal, feeding it every ounce of energy left in the city's core. They watched the last of their ships fall from the sky and whispered goodbye to the stars. The Illyrian queen, Lumea, stood on a high balcony overlooking her dying planet. The air was hot and heavy, thick with the scent of burned stone. She had lost everything, her family, her people, her home. But still she looked to the heavens. They will hear us, she said quietly. Someone will hear us. Her guards did not answer. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, at last, the power failed. The transmitter went silent. The light in the tower flickered and died. What remained of the Illyrian civilization vanished under the iron storms in the shadow of the Cathal fleet. Within weeks, the planet was nothing but ash and memory. The galaxy moved on. Other wars began. Other worlds rose and fell. No one remembered Illyra. The Cathal added its name to their list of conquered systems, then stripped it bare and left it behind. For centuries, their star burned dimly in the background, just one more point of light among billions. Yet the signal did not die completely. Though weakened, it drifted on, an echo too stubborn to vanish. Through meteor storms, past dying suns, across the empty stretches of cold vacuum, the tiny pulse continued. Sometimes it brushed the edge of a passing probe or a listening post, but never strong enough to catch attention. A few scientists from distant races noted a strange bit of background noise, a pattern that almost sounded like words, then ignored it as cosmic interference. On Earth, humanity grew and changed. They built cities in orbit, colonies on Mars, ships that reached the stars. They learned to live among alien species, though most still viewed them with fear or curiosity. Humans were known as the Deathworlders because they came from a planet where life itself was war. Poisoned jungles, freezing tundras, deserts that could kill. Their strength came from surviving what others could not. They were explorers, yes, but also dangerous when provoked. All the while, the ghost of Illyra's message drifted unseen, like a bottle lost in an endless sea. If anyone had found it then, they might have saved a world. Instead, the universe remained silent. The Illyrians became a forgotten name, their beautiful cities buried beneath alien dust. Still, there was something poetic about that lonely signal. It carried not just words but emotion, the sound of a people who refused to vanish quietly. It was filled with fear but also hope. Even in their final moments, the Illyrians believed in kindness. They believed that somewhere someone would care. Centuries passed. Stars were born and died. Empires rose and fell. The message continued to travel, fainter each year, yet it survived. Tiny fragments of data held together by luck and the stubborn persistence of the universe itself. No one could have guessed that one day, long after the Cathal thought themselves invincible, those faint fragments would finally be found. But that would come later. For now, the galaxy slept, unaware of the tragedy it had ignored. The stars shone as they always had, cold and distant. On forgotten Illyra, the wind moved across the ruins, whispering through broken towers, carrying echoes of laughter and song that once filled its shining streets. If anyone had been there to listen, they might have sworn the planet itself was still trying to speak, still sending out its message into the dark. The Illyrians were gone, but their last breath remained in the form of that faint, endless SOS. It was the sound of a civilization dying with dignity, hoping for mercy in a universe that never answered. It was a story that began with silence and would one day end with fire. 200 years passed before anyone noticed the ghostly message that the Illyrians had sent. Space had changed a lot since then. Humans had spread far beyond Earth. They lived on moons, in floating cities, and in giant metal stations orbiting distant suns. The old stories about Deathworlders had turned into legends. People joked about it now, but deep down everyone in the galaxy still knew. Humans came from the most dangerous planet anyone had ever seen. Their storms could flatten mountains. Their animals could kill in seconds, and their people, somehow, had learned to survive everything. One day on the edge of human territory, a small salvage ship drifted through the Perseus frontier. The ship was called Vigilant Sparrow, a rusty freighter that belonged to Captain Mara Juno and her crew of 6. They weren't soldiers or heroes. They were scavengers, searching for old technology, broken satellites, and anything that could be sold for a few credits. Life out there was hard. You could spend months floating through nothing but dust and frozen rock. Still, Mara liked the silence. It was better than the noise of war. Her crew picked up a strange reading one morning. It was faint, so weak that the ship's sensors almost ignored it. "Probably just cosmic junk," said Rix, the ship's engineer, chewing on a piece of dried fruit. He was always skeptical. But something about the pattern caught Mara's attention. It repeated every 13 seconds, too precise to be natural. She frowned and leaned over the console. "That's a signal," she said quietly. "An old one." For the next few days, they traced it across the sector, following the whisper of static until they found the source, a dead communications buoy, floating between 2 shattered asteroids. It was covered in burn marks, half melted, and its power core was nearly empty. Somehow, against all odds, it was still transmitting. The crew brought it aboard, cleaned it up, and tried to pull whatever data was left. At first, the translation software didn't recognize the language. It wasn't any modern dialect, not human, not from any of the known galactic tongues. Mara asked the ship's AI to reconstruct the missing pieces. Hours passed. Static filled the speakers. Then, late that night, a voice came through, soft, trembling, full of pain. "To anyone who can hear this, we are under attack. Please, help us. We are dying." The crew froze. The voice was alien, but its fear was unmistakable. Rick swallowed hard. "That's no distress beacon," he muttered. "That's a cry for help." The signal was ancient. Timestamps placed it at over 200 years old. Whoever had sent it was long gone. Still, the crew couldn't stop listening. They replayed it over and over, each time noticing new details. The distant rumble of explosions. The faint sound of a child crying. The words breaking apart into silence. When they brought the recording back to the nearest station, people gathered to hear it. Scientists, historians, even soldiers came. The message spread across networks and news channels. Someone found a match in an old archive. It came from a world called Illyria, long listed as lost. The more the researchers uncovered, the worse it became. The Illyrians had begged for help as the Cathal Dominion destroyed their planet, and no one had ever answered. The news hit the galaxy like a storm. Some races dismissed it as ancient history, saying there was no point in mourning a civilization that had vanished before their great-grandparents were born. Others felt shame. But among humans, the discovery stirred something deep, a mix of guilt, grief, and anger. In the capital city of the United Terran Coalition, the message was played before the Senate. The hall was silent except for the crackling voice from centuries past. When it ended, no one spoke for several minutes. Then a young senator from Mars stood up and said, "If this is what our galaxy has become, deaf to suffering, then maybe it's time we reminded them who we are." That speech spread faster than the signal itself. Across colonies and fleets, humans began to debate what it meant. To some, it was just a tragic relic. To others, it was a moral wound that had to be answered even if it came too late. Soldiers remembered the wars they had fought to protect strangers. Scientists remembered the explorers who had risked everything to reach the stars. Humanity had been many things, curious, reckless, violent, but never indifferent. Mara Juno and her crew became unexpected heroes. They were invited to testify before the council. "We didn't find treasure," Mara told them. "We found a voice that refused to die. If we ignore it now, we're no better than the ones who looked away." Her words were simple, but they struck home. Soon, the Illyrian SOS was playing on every human channel. It echoed through classrooms, bars, spaceports, and temples. Artists painted murals of the lost planet, and children whispered the name Illyria as if it were a spell. For the first time in years, humanity felt united, not by fear or greed, but by a shared sense of justice. The Cathal Dominion still existed. Their empire had grown fat and lazy over centuries of conquest. They ruled dozens of worlds with iron claws, their fleets blackening skies wherever they went. To most species, the Cathal were untouchable, too powerful to fight, too cruel to reason with. Yet humans were not like most species. They had come from a world that killed the weak and rewarded those who refused to surrender. The Illyrian message awoke that ancient fire inside them. Military officers began drafting reports. Admirals whispered about old grudges. Journalists published stories of Cathal atrocities. The phrase "never again" became a rallying cry. On Earth, millions watched as the United Terran Fleet prepared for its first major campaign in decades. Ships were pulled from retirement, shipyards worked around the clock, and recruitment lines stretched for miles. Still, there were those who questioned it. Some leaders warned that vengeance was a dangerous motive. "The Illyrians are gone," one diplomat said. "We cannot bring them back by spilling more blood." Others argued that justice delayed was still justice denied. "If we do nothing," replied Admiral Renkavale, "then the next plea for help might be ours." Meanwhile, the signal continued to be studied. Linguists uncovered fragments of Illyrian poetry hidden within the data, verses about stars and hope, and the promise of friendship among the cosmos. It made the tragedy even more painful. They were a peaceful people, destroyed not by fate but by cruelty. In the outer colonies, soldiers painted the word Illyria on their ships. It became a symbol, a ghostly reminder of why they fought. Young recruits whispered that they would fight not for revenge, but for the voice that had traveled across centuries to find them. The Cathal, upon hearing of human interest in Illyria, laughed. Their ambassadors dismissed the message as ancient nonsense. They underestimated what it meant to awaken the anger of Deathworlders. To them, humanity was still a primitive race of soft-skinned creatures who relied on machines to survive. They didn't understand that humans didn't just survive their world, they had conquered it. While governments debated and fleets assembled, Mara Juno watched the stars from her ship once more. The old buoy that had carried the message now sat sealed in a museum, but she could still hear the voice in her mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she imagined those words drifting endlessly through space, waiting for someone to care. She didn't know it yet, but her discovery had changed everything. The human race, which had once been divided by distance and politics, now had a shared purpose. Even those who had never been to Earth felt the pull of their origin, the stubborn, unbreakable will that had carried them from a deadly world into the heavens. The decision came quietly, almost anticlimactically. After weeks of debate, the United Terran Coalition voted unanimously. They would send a message of their own, not a plea, not a request, but a promise. The announcement echoed across the galaxy. We have heard the cry of Elira. Humanity will not forget. The Cathal Dominion will answer for this. The word spread like wildfire. Some alien nations gasped in fear, others in awe. The Cathal called it an empty threat, yet anyone who knew the Deathworlders, their history, their nature, felt a chill run down their spine. In the following weeks, Earth's orbit became a field of silver fire as warships aligned. The fleet stretched farther than anyone had seen in generations. These were not machines of conquest, they were monuments of fury, built to answer a scream that had gone unheard for too long. Somewhere, drifting beyond the edge of known space, the last faint pulse of the Illyrian SOS still flickered. It reached the sensors of the flagship Resolute Dawn, where a technician smiled sadly and said, "They finally got through." In that moment, something changed in the stars. The long silence that had swallowed Elira's cry began to break. What started as a whisper would soon become thunder, for the Deathworlders had listened at last. And when humanity listens, it never forgets. The great meeting of the United Terran Coalition took place inside a shining structure known as the Celestial Dome. It was built on the moon, high above Earth's scarred surface, where the sky was always black and the stars were close enough to touch. Representatives from every colony, station, and fleet gathered there to discuss one question that now hung over all of humanity. What should be done about the Cathal Dominion? The message from Elira had already spread through every world, every newsfeed and every conversation. Some called it a warning. Others called it a ghost. For the humans sitting in that dome, it was something more, a call to arms. The meeting began quietly. No one wanted to be the first to speak. On the large holo display, the Illyrian SOS played one last time, echoing through the vast room. The alien voice trembled with fear, fading into static. When the sound ended, the silence that followed felt heavy, almost alive. Then Admiral Renka Vale stood up. She was tall, her uniform marked by dozens of medals earned from a lifetime of battles. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned with anger. 200 years ago, she said, a people asked for help. The galaxy ignored them. We will not make the same mistake. Her words struck something deep in every person there. Humans had suffered before. They knew what it meant to be desperate, to cry out and be ignored. From the dark days of Earth's wars to the long nights of space colonization, survival had always been their greatest achievement. To let another species die without justice felt like betraying everything they stood for. Still, not everyone agreed. Some leaders from the outer colonies warned that war against the Cathal was suicide. The Dominion's fleets were vast, their armies endless. We cannot fight them, one governor said. They have crushed empires older than our civilization. We are ants to them. Admiral Vale looked at him and smiled coldly. Then we'll be ants with nuclear stingers. Laughter rippled through the hall, but beneath it was something else. Determination. For weeks, the debate continued. Some argued for diplomacy, others for preparation. Yet deep down, everyone knew that peace with monsters was an illusion. The Cathal had never stopped conquering. They had grown arrogant, believing no one would ever challenge them again. Now they would learn that Deathworlders were not like the rest. Outside the dome, preparations had already begun. Fleets moved into formation, supply chains were reorganized, and factories burned bright through the night. Engineers built new ships faster than ever before. The human race, scattered across 1,000 worlds, began to act as one body, one will. Every colony contributed. Minerals from Mars, fuel from Titan, ship parts from the Belt. Even small frontier settlements where people lived in domes of glass and ice sent what they could. The cry of Illyria had united them in a way no government ever could. Meanwhile, the Cathal Dominion finally took notice. Their spies reported that the humans were mobilizing. To the Cathal High Command, it was laughable. The great overlord Threxen of the Dominion, a creature with eyes like molten gold and claws sharp enough to cut steel, sat upon his throne of bones and sneered. "Deathworlders," he hissed, his voice like a knife scraping glass. "They think they can avenge ghosts? Let them come. We will feed on their courage." He sent out a broadcast across the galactic network, mocking humanity. The transmission showed his massive reptilian form lounging on a mountain of skulls. "We crushed Illyria beneath our claws," he said. "If humans wish to join them, our teeth are ready." It was meant to frighten. Instead, it enraged. On Earth, people gathered in streets to watch the broadcast, their faces hard and silent. When it ended, someone in the crowd shouted, "Then let them choke on us." The words spread like fire. Within hours, the phrase was painted on ships, armor, and city walls. The official declaration came 3 days later. The human ambassador, a calm woman named Ilara Voss, stood before a council of interstellar nations. Her image was streamed live across thousands of systems. She wore no armor, no weapons, just a simple blue uniform and a small silver badge over her heart. "We are not conquerors," she said. "We do not seek revenge. We seek justice." The Cathal Dominion destroyed a peaceful world and silenced its voice. That silence ends today. Then she paused, her gaze steady, as if she were looking directly into the eyes of every living being in the galaxy. "This is a debt long overdue." Those words became history. Within hours, the United Terran Fleet went to full alert. Millions of men and women reported for duty. Every shipyard launched vessels, sleek destroyers, massive carriers, nimble corvettes. From orbit, Earth looked like it was surrounded by silver fire. The first fleet to move was led by Admiral Vale herself. Her flagship, the Resolute Dawn, was a titan of metal and fury, capable of tearing through the void at incredible speed. She stood on the command bridge, staring at the stars where the Cathal Dominion waited. 200 years of silence, she whispered. "Let's make some noise." When the fleet jumped into hyperspace, the galaxy held its breath. For decades, the Cathal had ruled through fear, crushing any resistance. No one had dared to stand up to them in generations. Yet here came humanity, brash, untested in galactic warfare, but carrying something far more dangerous than weapons: conviction. The first confrontation took place near a border world called Varthus 9, a mining planet the Cathal had used as a slave colony. When human ships appeared in orbit, the Cathal fleet commander sent a transmission: "Leave now or be destroyed." The human reply was simple: "We've already seen what you destroy. This time we're watching back." The battle that followed was short but brutal. Human ships moved differently from anything the Cathal had ever faced. They fought like predators from a wild world, unpredictable, fast, unafraid of taking damage if it meant landing a fatal blow. The Dominion ships were larger, more powerful, but they were used to enemies who ran or begged for mercy. The humans did neither. Admiral Vale's tactics were ruthless. She ordered ships to ram when needed, to sacrifice engines for kills, to use gravity wells to pull enemy vessels into debris fields. By the time the smoke cleared, half the Cathal fleet was destroyed. The humans had lost ships too, but their victory was undeniable. The galaxy, watching through hidden broadcasts and intercepted feeds, could hardly believe it. Someone had finally bloodied the unstoppable Cathal. The news spread faster than light. On distant worlds once enslaved by the Dominion, people whispered in secret meetings. The Deathworlders were fighting back and winning. For the first time in centuries, the Cathal were afraid. Meanwhile, back on Earth, millions followed the updates in real time. Children learned the names of ships like Resolute Dawn, Vigilant Hope, and Iron Tempest. Old veterans volunteered to train new soldiers. Even those who hated war felt pride. The universe had ignored the Illyrians, but not humanity. Never again. In the following months, battles erupted across multiple systems. Some were victories, others disasters. The Cathal retaliated with fury, burning entire colonies in revenge. Still, the humans kept coming. Every death fueled their determination. They fought not for land or resources, but for an idea: the belief that no voice in the galaxy should go unheard. One night, after a long series of victories, Admiral Vale returned to her quarters aboard the Resolute Dawn. She opened the old recording of the Illyrian SOS and listened in silence. The static-filled voice still trembled with fear. She imagined those lost beings looking up at their sky, hoping for someone to hear. "We heard you," she whispered. "And we're still listening." Across the galaxy, the war spread like wildfire. The Cathal called it madness. The humans called it justice. Worlds once silent now sent messages of support, their own cries of defiance joining the chorus. It was no longer just about Illyria. It was about every planet that had ever been silenced, every people who had ever been crushed by the Dominion's claws. The declaration of war had done more than start a conflict. It had awakened something ancient in the human spirit, the same stubborn will that had helped their ancestors survive on a dangerous world full of predators and storms. Now that spirit burned among the stars. The Deathworlders had answered the cry that everyone else ignored, and they would not stop until the silence that had buried Illyria was broken forever. The war between the Deathworlders and the Cathal Dominion became a storm that spread across the stars. It started with small battles, but soon it turned into something much larger, an unstoppable wave of fire and metal that swallowed entire systems. The humans, once thought of as newcomers to the galactic stage, were now the center of every conversation, every fear, every hope. No one could believe how fiercely they fought. They were smaller in number, their technology less advanced than the Cathal, yet they refused to fall. It was as if the wild heart of their deadly home planet had followed them into space. The Cathal had never faced an enemy like this before. They were used to easy victories, worlds that surrendered at the first sight of their fleets, species that begged for mercy. But the humans were different. They didn't beg. Even when outnumbered, they kept fighting, using clever tricks and reckless bravery. They would ambush enemy ships from asteroid fields, lure massive cruisers into gravity traps, and fight hand-to-hand inside burning wrecks if they had to. The Cathal called them Firebloods because they seemed to thrive in chaos. Admiral Renka Vale led the charge across the front lines. Her ship, Resolute Dawn, became a symbol of defiance. Whenever her fleet arrived, other species took courage. People from enslaved worlds rose up, inspired by the humans' courage. The war was no longer just between two powers. It had become a rebellion of the oppressed against their masters. The stars, once silent under the shadow of the Cathal, now echoed with the roar of freedom. Still, the cost was high. Every victory came with loss. Human fleets burned through supplies, soldiers died in thousands, and colonies back home struggled to keep up. The war ate resources like a hungry beast, and there were nights when even Admiral Vale wondered if they could truly win. She stood often at the viewport, watching the streaks of distant battle fire, and whispered, "For Illyria." Those words kept her steady when everything else threatened to fall apart. The turning point came at the Battle of Vale's Edge, a narrow region of space filled with ion storms and shattered moons. The Cathal had hidden one of their major shipyards there, protected by 3 entire armadas. When Vale's scouts discovered it, she knew she had to strike, even though the odds were terrible. "If we destroy their shipyard," she said, "we take their claws." Her officers hesitated, but no one dared to argue. The human fleet entered the storms under heavy interference. Communications failed. Sensors flickered. It was like fighting blind. Yet Vale trusted her captains and the instincts of her people. The Cathal thought the humans would retreat once the lightning storms tore their shields apart. Instead, the Deathworlders pressed forward, using the chaos as cover. They wove through the debris, dodging plasma fire, striking from impossible angles. Some ships sacrificed themselves to shield others. The battle lasted 3 days, the sky lit by endless flashes of blue and red. On the 3rd day, the Resolute Dawn broke through the enemy line. Admiral Vale ordered all remaining ships to focus fire on the shipyard's reactor. The Cathal flagship, a massive dreadnought called Devourer of Suns, moved to intercept her. The 2 giants clashed head-on. Metal screamed. Fire spilled into the vacuum. Inside her command deck, Vale refused to fall back. "We finish what they started," she said, and rammed her ship into the dreadnought's core. The explosion was so bright it was seen from 5 systems away. When the smoke cleared, both flagships were gone, but the Cathal shipyard was destroyed. The Dominion lost its main source of production, and with it, their sense of invincibility. The human fleet was battered but alive. They called it the Reckoning of Stars. It became a symbol of what Deathworlders could do when pushed beyond their limits. After that, the war changed. The Cathal began to retreat. Their slaves rose against them, revolting across dozens of worlds. Every time a planet broke free, its people sent messages of thanks to the humans. "We fight because you fought first," they said. Humanity had become something larger than itself, a spark of rebellion that others followed. Still, the humans did not stop. They continued to chase the Cathal back through the systems they had ruled for centuries. Every battle felt like a piece of justice for the Illyrians. Soldiers painted blue streaks on their armor to honor Illyra's oceans, and the names of lost cities were carved onto ship hulls. To them, this was not just war, it was a funeral for the forgotten. As the humans advanced, they discovered what was left of Illyra. The once beautiful planet was now a graveyard. The seas were gone, the surface black and broken. Only the ruins of crystal towers remained, buried under centuries of dust. A landing team from the fleet touched down among the ruins, walking through the silence of a dead civilization. Captain Mara Juno, the same woman who had once found the Illyrian signal, was there. Her ship, Vigilant Sparrow, had joined the fleet as a scout vessel. When she stepped onto Illyra's soil, she felt a strange ache in her chest. She could almost hear the faint echo of the old transmission. Her team explored the ruins and found something miraculous. Beneath the ground, in the remains of a temple, there was an old power core still faintly humming. Inside it was the original transmitter, still pulsing weakly after all these centuries. Mara knelt beside it, brushing away the dust. The device sparked as if recognizing her touch. A faint broken sound filled the air. "Help us, please." She felt tears sting her eyes. "We heard you," she whispered. "We finally heard you." The discovery spread quickly. For the soldiers who had been fighting so long, finding Illyra was like finding the soul of their mission. The recordings were brought aboard the fleet's main archive. Scientists restored fragments of Illyrian art, language, and music. For the first time, the lost people of Illyra were more than a name. They were voices again. The humans built a memorial on the planet's surface, a tall spire of silver and glass, reaching toward the sky. At its base, they placed the transmitter, still running, sending out a new message this time. Not an SOS, but a promise. "Your voices were not lost," it said. "You are remembered." Meanwhile, the Cathal Empire continued to collapse. Their leaders turned on each other, blaming their defeats on cowardice and betrayal. Rebellions tore through their ranks. One by one, their outposts fell. The species they had enslaved for generations began to hunt them down. Yet even as victory approached, humanity did not celebrate. They had seen too much destruction, too much pain. Admiral Vale's name was carved into monuments across human space. To many, she became a legend, a warrior who had given everything for justice. Her sacrifice at Vale's Edge was told in songs, her final words repeated by soldiers before every battle. For Illyra, when the last Cathal stronghold fell, the stars went quiet again. The war that had once filled the galaxy with noise and fire was suddenly over. But this silence was different. It wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes after vengeance has been spent and tears have dried. Human fleets patrolled the borders, not as conquerors but as guardians. They helped rebuild the liberated worlds, sharing food, medicine, and technology. For many alien species, this was the first time anyone had fought for them instead of against them. The humans became known not only as Deathworlders but also as protectors of the silent. On Illyra, the silver spire stood tall against the red winds. Beneath it, new plants began to grow, seeded by human biologists who wanted to heal the planet's wounds. The sky was still broken, but every year it grew clearer. The faint blue glow of life returned to the cracks in the earth. Some said the planet was waking up. Mara Juno stayed there overseeing the restoration efforts. At night, she would sit by the memorial and listen to the soft hum of the transmitter. The new message repeated endlessly, drifting through space. "We heard you. We will remember." She often wondered if somewhere out there, beyond the stars, the spirits of the Illyrians were listening. In the end, the reckoning of stars was not remembered for the destruction it caused, but for what it restored. It gave back a voice to those who had been silenced and proved that compassion could travel across time itself. The Deathworlders had done what no one else dared. They had turned grief into strength, silence into thunder, and a forgotten SOS into the loudest cry for justice the galaxy had ever heard. Years passed after the Great War ended, and the galaxy slowly began to heal. The mighty Cathal Dominion, which had once ruled through fear and cruelty, was gone. Their fleets were wrecks drifting in empty space, their cities abandoned, their names spoken only as a warning in history lessons. The Deathworlders, humans, had done the impossible. They had defeated an empire that no one had dared to challenge for centuries. But victory did not bring celebration. It brought silence, a strange quiet that hung over the stars like mist after a storm. For many, the end of the war felt unreal. Generations had lived in fear of the Cathal, and now that fear was gone, replaced by confusion. What did freedom even mean to those who had never known it? Across the galaxy, liberated species began rebuilding their worlds. Broken cities were repaired, old songs were sung again, and new alliances began to form. Every planet had scars, but hope had finally returned. The humans did not claim any of the conquered worlds. That surprised everyone. Instead of taking land or resources, they left behind doctors, engineers, and builders. They helped repair the damage their war had caused. To them, the fight had never been about power. It had been about justice. The name Deathworlders, once whispered in fear, now carried a new meaning. It came to represent not destruction, but endurance and courage. At the edge of known space, where the story had begun, lay the silent world of Illyria. Its once shattered surface was no longer forgotten. The human fleet had turned it into a place of remembrance, a sanctuary for peace. They built a small base there, not for war, but for listening. It was called the Illyrian Outpost. From there, a signal was broadcast into the universe 24 hours a day. It wasn't a cry for help this time, but a message of memory. It said, "We heard you. We will always hear." The message repeated over and over, traveling endlessly through the same void where the original SOS had once wandered alone. The outpost became a sacred place. Pilgrims from all species came to visit it. Some came to mourn lost worlds. Others came to remember their ancestors who had suffered under the Cathal. The humans who lived there treated everyone with quiet kindness. They guided visitors through the memorial halls, showing them the restored fragments of Illyrian art, the delicate carvings, the glowing crystal symbols, and the final recordings of their songs. It was said that when the wind blew over the ruins at night, the sound carried faint whispers of those long-lost voices. Captain Mara Juno, the woman who had first discovered the Illyrian signal years before, still lived there. Her hair had turned silver, and her hands were rough from years of work, but her spirit remained strong. Every morning she would walk up the hill to the spire that stood above the ruins. The spire was tall and shining, made from the same kind of crystal the Illyrians had once used. At its top was a small beacon that pulsed gently, a steady heartbeat of light that reached into the endless dark. She would stand before it and close her eyes, listening to the faint hum that came from the transmitter buried deep below. To her, it felt like listening to the universe breathe. Sometimes visitors would ask her why humanity had gone so far for a people they had never met. She always gave the same answer: because they believed someone would come. We had to prove them right. Those words were written on the wall of the outpost's entrance in every known language. The galaxy changed because of what the Deathworlders had done. Species that once feared each other began to talk. Trade routes reopened. Planets formed councils to prevent the rise of another empire like the Cathal, and at every meeting the humans were treated with respect. They did not demand leadership, but whenever a crisis came, others looked to them for guidance. It was said that if a human promised something, you could trust it would be done, because they had already proven they kept their promises, even to ghosts. The younger generations of humans had grown up hearing stories of the war. To them, Illyria was not just history. It was a symbol of what it meant to be human. Schools across the colonies taught about the Illyrians, their peaceful nature, and their tragic end. Children learned that even the smallest signal of pain should never be ignored. Some dreamed of becoming explorers, not to conquer, but to listen, to make sure no voice ever went unheard again. Even among the stars, new life began to bloom. On Illyria, small patches of green appeared across the black ground. Scientists had worked for years to restore the planet's atmosphere, and now it was beginning to heal. The soil, once poisoned by war, slowly grew fertile again. One day, the first Illyrian flower, a pale blue bloom with petals like glass, was seen growing between two broken stones. Mara Juno found it during one of her morning walks. She knelt beside it and smiled softly. "You came back," she whispered. The story of that flower spread quickly, and soon people from all over the galaxy came to see it. They called it the Star's Promise. As the years went on, humanity continued to expand through the stars, but they carried Illyra's lesson with them. Whenever they discovered a new world, they built listening stations, small satellites that could detect distress signals, no matter how faint. They called them Guardians of the Silent. Each one played a short message recorded by children from Earth. "You are not alone. Back on Earth?" A grand ceremony was held to honor those who had fought and died in the war. In the center of the memorial stood a statue of Admiral Renka Vale, her face turned toward the stars. Beneath her feet was engraved her final command. For Illyra. The ceremony was broadcast across every colony and station. People cried and cheered at the same time, proud to belong to a species that had chosen compassion over comfort. Even the former slaves of the Cathal joined in the remembrance. One of them, a scaled alien named Vren, spoke at the ceremony. His voice shook as he said, "When the Cathal ruled us, we believed no one would ever hear our cries. Then the humans heard one that was 2 centuries old. That is who they are. That is why we live free today." The crowd erupted into applause that echoed across the square. Peace did not come easily, but it came honestly. The galaxy still had dangers: pirates, corrupt factions, hidden threats, but the era of terror had ended. People began to call this new age the Era of Echoes, because it began with a voice from the past that refused to fade. On the anniversary of the war's end, a ceremony was held on Illyra. Thousands gathered under the planet's thin blue sky. Children from many species stood together at the base of the spire, each holding a glowing lantern. When the signal played from the old transmitter, they released their lanterns into the air. They floated upward, filling the sky with soft lights that looked like new stars. Mara Juno stood among them, her eyes shining with tears. The wind carried a gentle sound through the ruins, almost like a sigh of relief. Later that night, as the crowd slept, Mara stayed awake beside the spire. She looked up at the stars, remembering everything: the day she found the signal, the battles, the pain, and the hope that followed. The galaxy was quiet now, but to her it was not an empty silence. It was the silence of peace, the silence that comes after justice has been done. She placed her hand on the transmitter's control panel and listened to the hum once more. Somewhere in that soft sound she imagined she could hear faint voices, thankful, gentle, eternal. "You're welcome," she whispered to them. "Rest now." When dawn came, light touched the spire and the beacon's glow reflected across the horizon. From space it looked like a small shining star rising over a world reborn. The signal continued to travel through the cosmos, passing by unknown systems, drifting among dust clouds and distant suns. Perhaps somewhere out there, another world would one day hear it and wonder who had sent such a peaceful message into the void. The story of Illyra became legend, passed down through generations. People told it not as a tale of war, but as a lesson about listening. They said that the universe is full of voices, some loud, some quiet, and some that can only be heard if you truly care enough to listen. And the humans born on their dangerous homeworld had become the galaxy's listeners, the ones who turned silence into a promise. In the end, the stars themselves seemed to remember. They twinkled a little brighter over Illyra, as if the lost Illyrians had become part of the night sky. The Deathworlders had proven something that would never be forgotten: that even in the coldest corners of space, kindness can echo forever, and a single unheard cry can change the fate of galaxies.